Hello there guys. There is no need to adjust your set. I am back with a Prince of Wales build. It's been a long time, I know. My last video when I actually just built up this kit was November 2023. So it's been a long time coming and it's been sat next to my desk in its box all that time. Anyway, things are moving again now. You may remember at the end of the last video I left the model like this, and I had the photo etch to add. Now to be honest with you, it was the photo etch which was putting me off this kit. Every time I looked down at it I just thought there were so many tiny pieces that need cutting, filing, gluing, and they're so delicate I'm just going to end up breaking them, and it was really just putting me off completely. So I decided, in order to get things done and to actually finish my first ever ship build, I would do the photo etch for the railings around the deck, and then I would sack off the rest of it. Yes, that means I've paid sort of what, £15 I think it was, maybe a little bit more, for the photo etch set, and I've wasted that £15. But realistically, if I didn't do that, I would end up not building the kit at all, and then I've wasted the whatever it was, £60 on the kit. So that's what I decided to go for, and as soon as I made that decision, things really started to move forward quite quickly. So as you can see, I do have the photo etch around the deck now, and it does look nice, it really does add something to it. But of course that is the most simple photo etch to add as well. That said, there are a few gaps that you have to leave in the photo etch fencing, and the instructions are not super clear about that. Or at least they're not for someone inexperienced like me. Anyway, once that was done, I could give the whole ship a coat of Tamiya primer, and then while that was drying, try to work out exactly how the Prince of Wales was painted. Now, at the time that she fought the Bismarck in May 1941, the Prince of Wales was painted in a navy light grey colour all over. So that would be the easy option. However, having already copped out once over the photo etch, I figured I should at least attempt the more complicated camouflage scheme that she wore in December 1941 when she was sunk off the coast of Malaya. The Tamiya instructions have been quite heavily criticised regarding this scheme, although to be honest I don't think they're super terribly wrong. However, Sovereign Hobbies have produced this well-researched and well-regarded schematic for her camouflage scheme, which is generally regarded as the most accurate that is out there. So that's what I'm going to be using for this. As you can see here, we've got a 5-colour camouflage scheme above the waterline. And after a bit of research I was able to come up with these rough Tamiya equivalents for each of these colours. I know they're not super accurate. I know there are some companies that produce British naval colours, but I really wanted to use something that I had in stock and was familiar with. So with that in mind, for that dark grey MS1 colour I've gone for XF69. Some sources suggest maybe adding a little bit of pink in there to warm it up. For the 507A, which is a kind of blue-grey colour, I've gone for XF82, which is ocean grey. For the MS3, I've gone for XF22. For MS4, I've gone for XF20. And for 507C, I've gone for XF19, which is sky grey. So here we are after the first paint session, and I've put a few colours down here. I've put the XF78 on the deck. I've put a stripe of black for the waterline stripe down the side, and then I've taped over that with Tamiya tape, and that will stay on there until the paint scheme is complete. And then I've painted everything above that tape in the XF20 medium grey, including all of the superstructure, the turrets and everything except the deck. And of course I've left all of those superstructures just dry fitted for now to help me with the masking. Talking of the masking, I had a few options. Though I've put down that XF20 as the base colour, in a way I've made more work for myself by doing that, because now I would have to mask off every little bit of XF20. So instead I decided to go the other way, even though it means applying some of the darker colours first. And I started then with the MS1, which is the XF69, that dark grey there on the left. And I just painted some large areas where that is according to the schematic. So you can see here, for example, on the port side, we've got those two quite distinctive arches of that dark grey colour, plus a sort of a incomplete third arch towards the stern. So I've very roughly painted those on, being fully aware that I'll go outside of that area. Then I've taken some of my trusty old Tamiya masking sheet and I've cut out the shapes for that to mask over that dark area. So here you can see, for example, those two arches are masked off, and on the starboard side towards the stern, that kind of wave-like structure has also been masked off there. That then makes it a bit easier to apply some of the other colours. So for example, inside both of those arches we have got a lighter grey colour, and I filled both of those arches with that. That midships arch is now finished, and that colour, once it's dry, can be masked off. The ones towards the stern, of course, have another layer of colour in, and I can start to mask those off as well, and just slowly build it up. That wasn't easy, but I think it probably was the easiest way to do things. And to be honest, that was my basic technique for painting most of the model. It's not a complicated technique, it is just quite fiddly and quite time consuming. I didn't always start with the same colour. I basically went with the approach that the smaller areas are easier to mask, and so I would paint the smallest area first, put some masking over that, and then the next largest area, and so on. I did do all of the hull before I did any of the superstructures, however, because I wanted to make sure everything was in the right place and lined up as much as possible. Because of course the idea is, if you view the ship from the waterline, the camouflage pattern carries on across both without a break. I'm also aware that the patterns are not precisely following the guide, but I think they are good enough. In fact, ironically, the one bit I seemed to mess up was the easiest bit, which was the black stripe. For some reason I didn't seem to get a solid black there. It was of course much easier to paint the superstructure with the parts separate like this. I did have to use some guesswork because of course we only get the side views on the profile, so it wasn't always clear what went around the front or the rear of these pieces. And of course I did frequent checks to make sure that the superstructure and the hull were aligned in terms of the camouflage pattern. The turret mounts were slightly more difficult to paint. In the end I decided to give them a base coat of XF20 and not worry too much about overspray onto the deck, because I could fix that later, and then put the camouflage on top using the same technique. I figured it was easier to mask off this cylinder shape and repaint the deck than to mask off the deck and paint the cylinder. There is a small amount of detail painting to do as well. So the walrus seaplane needs a camouflage pattern of dark slate and ocean grey, with sky undersides. The correct colour for the life rafts and the life boats was not clear. Different sources said different things, and different modellers have used different colours. In my case, I gave the rafts a coat of XF82, which is that sort of ocean grey colour, and then the inner a khaki colour to represent the sort of the meshing, the webbing in the centre. For the life rafts, I gave them a coat of XF20 on the underside and XF1 white on the top side. I then came back and painted what I thought was wooden floors in a wooden colour. Maybe that's not quite realistic, maybe the floors would have been painted too, but that's what I did. The barrels on the main guns were also an interesting painting challenge. The reference from Sovereign Hobbies does have camouflage patterns for each side of each individual barrel. I tried to follow these, but my paintwork is quite rough compared to the printed reference. At this stage I gave the deck a coat of XF78 wooden deck tan. I made a mistake earlier. The initial coat I'd given it was XF55 deck tan, which is a much more pale, much lighter colour. So I preferred this more wooden yellow brown, and then I had to go and brush paint all of these items that are sticking up out of the deck, all of which should be the base camouflage colour of XF20. The easiest way I found to do this was to do 5 passes, so to go across and do the top of every single piece, then come back and do the port side of every single piece, then the front, the rear, the starboard, etc. And that way hopefully I wouldn't miss any sides of any pieces. The last detail to add was the crane, which was used for loading and unloading the aircraft. This is the plastic kit part here, which I'm sure you can appreciate is not super detailed. So I did have a second attempt at the photo etch for this. Eduard gives a lot of photo etch detail here. I didn't use all of them, but I did take this flat piece of photo etch here and bend it into the crane shape. That's gone surprisingly well, and does of course look a lot better than the plastic version. Gun barrels on the various smaller caliber weapons need painting. Once I was happy with the painting of everything, I gave everything a coat of VMS matte varnish, and then it was really just a case of bringing the ship together. You do have to follow the Tamiya instructions really carefully for the order of construction, because sometimes you have one layer and then a mast, and then an upper layer which goes around the mast in a certain way, and if you get the sequence wrong, it simply won't work. I used sepia oil paint thinned with odourless thinner to give a wash to the deck. I don't think that works super well on the wooden planks because the grooves between them are too fine to catch the pigment, but the oil wash did flow around the details and provide a bit more emphasis for those. It also served to provide a slightly uneven finish to the wood, which is a bit more realistic. I applied the same paint, thinned a little bit more, over the superstructure to try to catch the details on that. And then I did have an attempt at rigging. The rigging diagram is not super helpful on the instructions, but essentially we've got 6 horizontal-ish wires going across and then several going down. I attempted a simplification of this process and I put some wires on going across using this black lycra rigging. Now straight away here I made a mistake. I didn't realise till later, but I put this on the wrong horizontal piece at the front there at the bow. I also managed to break one of the masts under the tension of the rigging. But I've done my best, super glued things in place and then snipped them off with a pair of scissors. And I don't think it looks too bad. We get a variety of decals for the flags, and of course which ones were flown depends on whether or not we were in combat. And with that done, my Prince of Wales, after a year and a half, is complete. And there we go guys, that was my long build of the Tamiya 1/350 scale Prince of Wales, painted as she was on her final journey to Malaya in 1941. I did really enjoy this build, and looking at the overall ship now, the build itself isn't that complex. There's not that many parts to put together. I think the difficulty for me first of all came in the photo etch and how overwhelming that was, and I don't regret leaving most of that photo etch off. If you notice during the build process, those rails that I put on around the deck were in various states of damage, and I think if I had put all the photo etch on all the other parts, they would have got slowly damaged during the painting and the building too. The painting of this of course was also quite a big challenge, but I think it looks pretty decent. I've decided not to weather the model. I could have done some streaking down the sides, some rust around the anchors and so on, but I decided to leave her as she is at the moment. I'm sure I'll be able to do better in a future ship kit, and I do have a few in the stash. I've got the Tamiya 1/350th Tirpitz, which is very much of similar vintage to this kit, but with perhaps a slightly easier paint scheme. I also have the USS Indianapolis in 1/350 scale from Academy, and also from Academy I've got the 1/700 scale USS Yorktown. And that's not to mention the various kits from Verifier in 1/350 scale, which I have reviewed recently. They of course are super detailed, and I think I would want to practice my skills on a simpler kit before I attempted any of those. Anyway, I'm going to go find a space on my shelf for this, and while I do, I would like to say thank you to all of you for watching, and special thanks to my Patreon supporters and YouTube members. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you again in a future one. Until then, thanks again for watching, and have fun modelling.